Hello vets, welcome to Veterans Nation. I'm Michelle Ladd and we're here with Rick Seaman. And today we have a very special guest, Shad Meshad. Welcome, Shad.
Thanks for having me today. I'm excited.
Special indeed. This is a special edition that we've got for you today. Shad, hey man, thanks for coming in.
Welcome home, GI.
Welcome home, GI is right. It's the same to you, buddy. Shad, of course, is no stranger to Veterans Network. As those of you who've been hanging out with us over the years know, but for the new viewers out there, Shad is the president and founder of the National Veterans Foundation here in Los Angeles, and he's known worldwide as one of the leading authorities on post-combat mental health. He served in Vietnam as a captain in the medical corps, specializing in combat mental health. And from there in 1979, Shad was instrumental in the creation of street counseling outposts out of the VA, and these went on to become the VA Vet Centers as per Public Law 96-22.
Correct.
And that was 1979.
Very impressive.
Back before the word PTSD was even invented.
Exactly.
Been a long ride, my friend.
It has been.
Yeah.
I think of the early 70s coming out here and actually in 74 meeting Dr. Charles Figley had just gotten his PhD at Purdue, and he was trying to figure out, what is the correct diagnosis for all these warfighters coming out of Vietnam. He was a Marine warfighter. He was there in the beginning of the war in Vietnam. And I had, at least 900 active Vietnam vet clients all over the county of Los Angeles. We had about 335,000 Vietnam era veterans in the county at that time, which is larger than the city I was born and raised in, just Vietnam era veterans. So it was interesting. It was in 1970 in Time magazine, Dr. Chaim Shatton, a New York psychiatrist that was working with Vietnam veterans at that time, tried to describe, what veterans were going through and why there really need to be a diagnosis, and he just used the word loosely, post-Vietnam syndrome. And right away it's like, wow, we finally know what this is, this problem of veterans coming back. It's PVS. And we had that all through the 70s, in fact, when Dr. Figley and I were trying to push his concept of delayed stress, from trauma. We were always going, but we've got a diagnosis. Well, it's not a diagnosis. Everybody has a syndrome of some type, Yeah. But it was interesting, and all through the 70s we fought to get this diagnosis, which eventually became PTSD in 1980 and DSM-4. So it's a journey. It's been a journey.
Yeah, and here we are.
Now, was this had this already been addressed within, say, the law enforcement community? Anybody know the answer to that one?
Back then?
Oh, no.
Back then.
Absolutely not. No. It was just, if you were having problems, if you were caught in a traumatic, say, gunfight and your partner was injured or whatever, you just went on. You saw a psychiatrist and went on medical leave. And if you couldn't get better, you were eventually medically discharged, just like war veterans.
Yeah. So we've got these shows on TV like ABC's 2020 and CNN's 360 with Anderson Cooper. What we're going to do today, I think, is we're going to do our own show, and we're going to call it 60/40. Because I learned this from Shad years ago, and I'm going to have him reiterate on it, that it's believed that 60% of combat veterans get out of the military service, move on with their lives, and are pretty much trouble-free. Whereas 40% experience some sort of mental post-combat problems. Not necessarily full-on PTSD, but there's something going on. And that half of that number, taking it down to 20%, are with PTSD for the long run. Shad?
Yeah,
correct me if I'm wrong, or grow off of that.
That's a great layman explanation of the study, the 10-year study, the $10 million study by several research psychologists who were hired. And by the way, Dr. Charles Figley was the editor of that famous study and book. And it was titled Delayed Stress Amongst Vietnam Vets. And it was a real insight into the coming home process and the readjustment. But in layman terms, 60%, which was really interesting, of those combat vets that came back with minor readjustment, just getting back and knocking the sand or the jungle mud off of them or whatever, moved on with their lives. 40% had readjustment problems, some more serious than others. And half of that group had what we know today as PTSD at some level, because even today we know there are different levels of PTSD. In these two wars today, there's layered PTSD. So it was a fascinating study. And also these researchers, as this book went around the world, realized that this is pretty much true for all wars. I'm not in research, but the research tools that were used or whatever signify that this was probably the ultimate study on PTSD as it relates to war veterans and the percentage of those that move on, which is a high number. One of the problems when a new diagnosis comes out is everybody thinks everybody's got it. Well, 60% of us didn't have it, and maybe 80%, but there's still that percentage, and it's a high number when you think of about 4 million people that fought in that war. You take 20% and you bring them into society. And in shows we've done in the past, we talked about how that different individuals with PTSD, how it's played out in their lives and in society, and some of it's not real pretty.
So you say that that it affects all, whether it's Korean vets or Vietnam vets, World War II, that whole thing. Do we see that 40%? Do we see those numbers? I know you said there's different levels, but do you see the more serious incidences increasing with our Afghanistan or Iraqi returnees?
I'm suspect, because most of these studies were done, and most people, other than at least in Vietnam, the average tour was one. I mean, there were plenty of veterans, but when we say plenty, maybe 5% that were career and did 2, 3, 4 tours. I mean, maybe more. But the standard length of duty was a year, 13 months for a Marine that was drafted or whatever, and that was it. So today, with over half of these 2 10-year wars we've been in, were fought with Reserve and National Guard, people that work supposedly most of the time and then go in when needed, or been the main war fighters. And they've been pulled in and out, and they fought in high incidents of combat more than any war on record because of the near-death experiences. There's no safe place in these two wars.
And even our regular...
The biggest kills, the majority of the kills, 75% of the kills or more, were in the green zone in Baghdad, of that 5,000 or 6,000 that died in these two wars. I mean, green zone, that's supposed to be the safe zone. You walk around, put your bathing suit on, go play tennis, like some of the officers did, in Saigon or whatever. But that's a big difference. And the multiple combat tours. And the signature wound of these two wars, traumatic brain injury, with symptoms overlapping. It's a real gummy gumbo of a mess. We just don't know. But I would guesstimate it's going to be high.
A lot of good information there from a very expert source, Shad. We're going to take a quick break. Vets, stay tuned. We'll be right back.
As mortgage rates continue at historic lows, VA's home loan program is being used in record numbers by veterans, service members, reservists, National Guard members, and some surviving spouses. Eligible borrowers have an opportunity to qualify for no down payment home loans, in addition to regular and interest rate reduction refinance home loans. Whether used for purchasing a home or refinancing an existing mortgage, VA guaranteed home loans are made by banks and mortgage lenders, with VA promising to pay part of the loan amount if the borrower fails to repay the balance. And a unique aspect of this VA program is a commitment to help borrowers keep their homes if they encounter financial difficulties. In fact, according to the Mortgage Bankers Association, VA's foreclosure and serious delinquency rates for more than a year have been the lowest in the housing industry, even when compared to prime loans. VA's loan specialist can intervene on a veteran's behalf with the loan servicer to explore home retention options, including repayment plans, loan modifications, and forbearance. More information about VA's home loan program can be found online by going to www.homeloans.va.gov or by calling toll-free at 1-877-827-3702.
We are back with Shad Meshad, and this is 60/40. So, Shad, what are some of the factors that make a returning vet one of the 60%?
Well, there's been really no studies, but in my experience, a lot has to do where the individual came from in society. We know that a lot of the great combat vets came out of inner cities that were had been raised in and seen death and near-death experiences, and were comfortable with it. And we compare that, say, to a California surfer, that everything was just Southern California beaches and his surfboard and pretty girls and the Beach Boys singing along or whatever. And the next thing you know, he's in a horrific situation in Vietnam. And when you've seen the movies and you've seen documentaries, so that's one thing. The other thing is the coming home process, I think. And none of these are in order, because it really is not asked a lot, and it's a great question. And I think a lot has to do with the coming home and how soon this individual is able to communicate to somebody. These are the things that I experienced in my work over 41 years, whether it's with his parents or his girlfriend, where there was an open dialogue and he was able to be comfortable in talking about uncomfortable things. I think another point, which goes back to his service in country, was the leadership that he fought under.
Right.
And the other thing that we know, and we're learning more and more, is how the brain is altered in combat. Everybody's brain structured. It's like some people are able to lift more weights than others, and can be less structured, look smaller or whatever, but are actually stronger. So there's a structure in the brain that we're understanding, because there's a lot of brain studies going about how traumatic brain injury, mild traumatic brain injury affects the brain. We're trying to find subtle things because we know that will affect the brain down the line. And the same with trauma, emotional trauma, near-death experience, and how the brain is altered. And everybody's brain handles it different than others. So maybe the majority, which 60% is, have a structure of the brain that can handle near-death and ungodly and horrific sights and experiences in a war zone. So these are all factors that are, for me, have been there, and I think of those. I've never really talked about it, which I think is a great question, but when I'm seeing someone, I'm assessing that, because the ones that come to me are not the happy-go-lucky 60%ers. Those are my buddies and friends, like Rick or whatever, but the people that I see are the ones that are experiencing the severe readjustment problems, from traumatic experiences. It's just a constant movie that loops and loops and loops. They're constantly seeing the war, and they never can let it go. Doesn't mean that you can't have an experience. I can still react. I still have things, startle noises or things make me jump, start. I never had that before. I hear a pitch of a helicopter, or certain smells that take me back are very powerful. But it doesn't keep me from coming here today, or keep me from enjoying things or whatever. So it's I don't know how much we can dissect on a show like this.
Right.
No,
but
just have a question
these are many years of observations and thousands of things, and all the studies that are going on, but they haven't integrated them yet. I sit and I look at all of them, but I do know that the brain is altered. And it's not like it looks different, but it does look different when you look at it electrically, and how all the firing of the neurons and everything.
You take a World War II vet. Michelle and I were talking earlier. She had done a thing with some World War II vets, and her impression was that these guys were kind of, loosening up and talking about things, but you said you were also under the impression that this was like maybe the first time they did it.
Yeah.
So what did these guys do for 50 years?
Well,
I mean,
they came back to, just think of what we came back to. No war veteran in our country has ever come back to what they had. And I mean, the whole society embraced them. They couldn't buy a drink. They couldn't do this. Many of them, probably lower echelon guys, wore their uniforms for years, just the dress stuff, but not completely. Yeah. But I mean, it was just like, the pin or the hat or whatever. Yeah. It was their symbol of these saved the world. I mean, they had that. They had no blockage when we talk about getting, a GI Bill. I mean, they wanted to go back, so they pushed it on them. They needed a house, they got a house. The world was different then, and the world opened up to them. Never has a veteran come back with such open arms.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
And not that they didn't have PTSD.
Right.
Because they just wasn't identified.
Right.
But it was supported positively.
They were, and I think that 60% you may have met that have made it 70, 80, 90 years have really, really been doing quite well overall. Not, they may have had the opportunity to talk about it, but it was like they had all these other rewards. Not that it wasn't good for them to talk about it, because we saw that in Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But we talk about the 60%, and we're giving them credit for being able to make it. But some of those 60% are 60%ers for a long time, and then all of a sudden they fall off the cliff. I had an uncle who was a World War II Marine, fought in the Pacific, infantry. At my young age, I knew him as a happy Uncle Bill. He was always having backyard barbecues. He was always laughing and joking. He had a successful business. And when he got to be in his late 50s, my aunt went up in the attic one day. Unbeknownst to her, there he is. He's dug out his old Marine uniform, and he's got it on. It doesn't even fit him anymore. And he's marching around the attic. Yeah. And she looked, and she ducked out. He didn't know she was even watching, and scared the hell out of her. 2 weeks later, he disappears, and they find him in Florida, 1,000 miles away, in his car. He gassed himself with the exhaust, took himself out. All just in a matter of a month. Well, after all those years.
These are just guidelines. We just know generically, and they're very helpful. But it doesn't mean that there's going to be someone or somehow the brain, because we don't know that much more of the brain, where there used to be this thing that it's a freeze-dried effect. We found out that usually in the first studies of Vietnam vets, it was about 18 months before all of a sudden everything, because you just kind of are numb. It's just like in any traumatic event. You go numb, then you start processing, then you get angry. How could this happen to me? Then you get depressed, and then, this is sort of the sequence in suicide or depression. So, we don't know, taking this uncle, what part of his brain. Plus, we also know, regardless of being a war veteran, that at 55 is the highest point of our society for suicides amongst men.
Oh, really?
Okay, so that factors in.
Wow.
Yeah, he could have looked at his life and said, hey, and I want to go back when I was a hero or whatever, and he hits depression. Once again, we know it has to do with the brain. There's a frequency in the brain. I know right where it is, because when I deal with people with depression, I have them tap on it. There's a sequence of stuff to realign that brain, and it's weird how they, all of a sudden, it's like, they'll either cry or laugh. It's such a release, because it's an electrical charge that I've used when I demonstrate. I said, is that uncomfortable? They go, well, not really, but I could hold this through the rest of the show. This would start hurting. It would move up into her arm, into her neck, or whatever. You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And you could look at that over years, just sort of holding it or whatever. all of a sudden you get into your 50s and you've done everything, and you're in that middle age, and you don't want to lose your youth. We've all been through it. I'm not saying dramatically, but who doesn't want to go back and be 25 or 30?
Right.
I mean, just in that respect, but you can't go back. And then and then you have some upsets. And it's not about wealth and being financially successful. Now, those are nice things, but we know the brain doesn't operate on that. The right side of the brain is all the emotions. The left side can say, hey, yeah, I'm sitting here, I'm talking to you, but how do I feel about this? And you're bringing up all these subjects, and I'm getting anxious, and I'm getting, and my anxiety level is exploding, and where am I going to take this? And I've never been rated for PTSD. We can't look at 60-40 like it's this, you're on this team and you're on that team, and because there's going to be these stories that don't fit with any of it. It's just a way to manage these large number of souls that are called warfighters. And I'm sure I've heard stories because I've been all over the world, and I've taught, and I hear the same thing. I'm back in dialogue with 7 of the Blue Berets in Russia when I went to Russia that fought in Afghanistan. And now they're reading my blogs, and they're interacting through their daughters because they still can't do it. And it's beautiful. I mean, it chokes me up.
Yeah.
And they're doing good. And on the outside, and they've got their families and their wives, at least, but, they're now in their mid-40s. They're mid-40s, getting near their late 50s. You hit that 50 mark, that's a big mark.
That's a big mark.
Big mark. Mid-50s for male is
I've never heard that, and that's probably something a lot of people aren't aware of.
It's huge.
Yeah.
So Rick, you seem to fall into the 60% category. Is this, how do you see
Shad's
this?
over there laughing. No, I'm 60. I'm in the 60%, but I have a pretty good idea why I'm there. But I just want to say, 60%. I'm sure Shad will agree. There's never a perfect 60%er. You know what I mean?
Right. There's no.
I go through emotional moments. I have memories. Things can trigger me. One of the things that triggers me the most emotionally is talking to these new vets coming out. And there's that mirror effect, and you start to feel what they're feeling, and that'll tear me up and choke me up in a heartbeat, and I have moments of I kick trash cans, I work on cars a lot, and I learned from some old mechanics, old crusty mechanics, used to throw wrenches, and they had a vocabulary of profanity that was just unknown to man. And maybe that's why I sometimes I'll throw a fit working on a car and kick some and throw some, and then I'll turn around and laugh about it, think it's funny, Or my wife will say, Rick, you've been talking to yourself out here in the kitchen for about 20 minutes. I'll go, yeah, I haven't heard anything funny in a long time. I'm just telling myself jokes, So, but there's all that. But Shad's going, oh man, I got to look at this guy. We got to do something. No. I was fortunate. I did go through some drawdown or debriefing, as you would call it. I spent 4 months in Korea before I got out, following Vietnam, after I got out of the hospital, and that helped. A lot of debriefing there with fellow vets, and we talked about this the other day on the show. But beyond that, I came home to a wife. I had a wife waiting for me. Wasted no time making her pregnant, having a kid, I got back into the same business I was in, when I left, fortunately. And I had a lot to do and a lot to just keep me occupied, A lot of my old buddies had turned hippie on me, but that didn't bother me, Hell, I went out and smoked dope with the hippie buddies, and maybe marijuana helped too. I don't know. We know, Shad will tell you, drugs and alcohol with PTSD is like trying to put a fire out with gasoline. I've heard him say that. But I don't know, maybe a little pot helped me smooth out. I don't know. But I think I was fortunate to just go through that next, 40 years. Without any outside problems that got anything stirred up, and maybe I was strong going in, like you said. I was probably one of those tougher kind of kids that that affected. So That's all I can say, you know. And I'm fortunate and I'm thankful. And
no, that sounds. I mean, you're not.
Does that make sense?
It's hard to say, Rick. You're normal. I mean, you're Yosemite Sam. You're a character. But that, you have, I think just listening to your story is so positive for a person reintegrating. Coming home to someone you love, having the debriefing, getting back into what you were passionate about, and doing some recreational drugs. It not gonna hurt you because it didn't become your main focus.
Right.
It was just like having a drink, having a baby.
Yeah.
Right. Doing stuff, doing this.
Have a baby, have a joint. Right.
Not being bothered by those that that weren't didn't serve with you. Didn't didn't feel this necessity to tell them hey, you guys are wusses and I did this or that or whatever. It sounds like I don't want to use the word, we don't know what normal means, but it was a good reintegration for you. Still,
and I don't by any chance claim to be unique. I think 60%ers, that's a lot of
all types.
But
they moved on.
But similar.
But they moved on. They got involved or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Shad, hey, listen, a lot of good information here. I'd like to continue this. Can you come back for another round?
I'd be more than glad to work my schedule out and come back for another round.
That's what we're going to do, folks. We're
Right.
going to do round 2 of the 60-40 special. All right.
Great, done deal.
Done deal.
Thank
Okay.
you again so much. So this is segment 14. It'll run for 72 hours, and then we will show you segment 15. You can also catch us on YouTube. If you've missed some of the back ones, you can look at YouTube, and we're there as well.
Right. And we just opened our archives, too. All VeteransNation previous shows are now up on archives. There's a little archive link right below the screen you're watching us on. And you get to all those previous shows. So stay tuned. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, Vets, and welcome home.
Welcome home.
2 flags fly above my land and really sum up how I feel. One is the colors that fly high and proud, the red, the white, the blue. The other one's got a rattlesnake with a simple statement made. Don't tread on me is what it says, and I'll take that to my grave. Because this is me. I'm proud to be American and strong in my belief. And I've said it before, but I'll say it again, 'cause I've never needed government to hold my hand. And I've said it before, but I'll say it again, 'cause my family's always fought and died to save them.